of it's getting me hard. What's going on, everybody? Happy Tuesday. I hope you're ready to break down or to wrap up Pamela Anderson's new book, Love, Pamela. Let's get into it. Oh, hi, it's me, Zack Peter, pop culture junkie, reality TV insider, published author, and host of the No Filter with Zack Peter podcast. Here I'll bring you all the latest news on the Real Housewives, deep dives into celebrity legal scandals, and unfiltered convos with your favorite stars. I've got you covered. And yes, I always keep receipts. So be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for all the latest tea. Now, let's dive in. Hello, welcome on in, everybody. We are wrapping up Pamela Anderson's book, Love, Pamela. Last week for our weekly unpack, we broke down the documentary on Netflix, Pamela, A Love Story. Well, today we're breaking down Love, Pamela. So we've covered the first 4 chapters last week. Today, we're getting into the full book. If you remember from last week, we talked about Pamela's upbringing. She talked about the assault from her babysitter. She talked about her boyfriend and his friends assaulting her. So she opened up about some of that like past trauma from being a kid and from being a teenager, a young teen. And then where we left off last week, she was entering Playboy. Oh, look at Lane Rickles says, "You suck." Well, happy Tuesday, Lane. You can suck my dick. Okay. No neck, no ankles. I've got time, baby. Okay. Hi, Houston girl. Hi, Val. Hi, Aaron. Hi, Mary Ann. Hi, Lauren. Hi, Kylie Ellison. Let me know where you guys are watching in from. Is the book much different from the Netflix movie? Okay. The short answer is no. There's literally not a whole lot that you get in the book that you don't get in the documentary. And I'm just going to give that right out there right now. So yeah. Let me know. Give me your name and what city or country, if you're out of the U.S., that you're watching in from. Hello, Nick. Hello, Ankles. What's going on? Hi from Phoenix. Becky from Phoenix, Arizona. We have Steph from Vancouver. We have Stacy from Chicago. We have Chris from Memphis, Tennessee. Okay, thank you. I have the book on standby. I would say watch, like, overall, I would say, oh, hi, Joe Hollywood from WeHo. I would say, oh shit, I'm writing all over myself. Watch the documentary, skip the book. I wouldn't even recommend the audiobook. I would say just skip the book altogether. Watch the documentary. You're not going to get anything new. We have Jessica from San Juan. We have Patty from San Diego. We have Brittany from Brisbane, Australia. Okay. So shall we dive into it then? Because at this point, I'm going to try to skim through it as quickly as we can. Let me know what you guys think of it. So picking up where we left off, we have chapter 5. We ended on chapter 4 last week where she entered Playboy. She was loving Playboy. Playboy's amazing. Oh my God. Let's get into it. Okay. So chapter 5 opens up with her taking a meeting with producer John Peters. And things seem to have gone really well. He really liked her. She really liked him. He began showering her with gifts. Originally, he told her not to do Playboy because he was worried that it was going to ruin her brand. But she said, nobody makes that decision for me. I'm an independent woman, cute Destiny's Child. So having him in her life, she said, was very exciting. She said that he made a very lasting impression on her. Which, yeah, I mean, shit, he bought her a house. He got her own house. He like gifted her a house. And then enter Mario Van Peebles. And Mario Van Peebles, you may know him from 21 Drum Street. He ended up pursuing Pamela. And at the time, she was living in John's house, the one that he bought her. And when Mario found out, he was like, it's time you pack your bags and get out. Don't trust these rich men that are going to give you a house like that. If they're showering you in gifts, there's a bigger expectation, and eventually you're not going to be able to get out. So he's like, you're going to end up stuck here if you don't get out and find a way to make it on your own, which I actually think is just smart life advice. Even if you have a sugar daddy. I mean, look at what happened with Erica Jane. Look at what happened to like Ashley Darby. She's like kind of struggling to like move on without Michael Darby. And that's what happens when there's this really intense power shift or power imbalance. And then when the shift happens because you decide to leave him or you try to leave him, it ends up really screwing you in the end. So he seemed to kind of warn her, which was kind of good because I think it eventually taught her how to stand on her own 2 feet. Her mom told her, follow your heart. She's like, listen, do whatever your heart tells you to do. So Pamela packed up her things and she found herself a new apartment. And even recently, John Peters came out and he said that he has $10 million safe for her in his will. He said that he's never told her that. So I guess this was like the big announcement to her that that's going to be there. And I'm sure the IRS is like, ooh, $10 million. Let's get it. Because I heard like she's been very open about like not being very good with money. So now here she left John. She's living on her own, got herself her little apartment. She says that, now she was starting to really come to terms with her own wants and her own needs and figuring out what she wanted her future to look like. She started doing some inner child work. She started doing some shadow work, lots of the woo-woo LA stuff that we know and love, and we know and love, and we know that she loves to do all of this in her own life. She ended up staying with Mario. She dated him during this time. He was very proud of her for leaving John because that's not an easy thing to do when you have a sugar daddy and he's paying all the bills. It's easy to stay. And she decided to not stay and she decided to leave. She said he proposed to her, but she thought it was a joke initially. So she wasn't like interested. She's like, oh my God, don't ever do that to me again. LOL. That was cute. And I guess she wasn't sure if he was serious, though. She thought it was a joke at the time. And she's like, but looking back, I think he may have actually been seriously proposing to me. So she says that Playboy allowed her to come out of her skin and push boundaries. She had this like sexy girl next door image, but she was also like very flirty with the camera. So it seemed like, this really helped her build that confidence that she didn't have growing up. Have said that she's the DNA of Playboy. She had the girl next door, but she also had this kind of like seductive vibe to her as well. And he really liked that. And, it seemed like she helped Playboy continue to move forward because they had her and she became like kind of famous and popular. You have like the Pamela Andersons and the Jenny McCarthy's and the Carmen Electras that kind of kept Playboy moving forward. And then, they obviously helped build Pamela Anderson into the Pamela Anderson that we all know today. She said that Hef did everything to protect her girls, and she has a good intuition, and that always seemed to avoid her from danger. But it's interesting because she speaks very highly of Hef. She speaks very highly of Playboy, which is also very different from like the Holly Madison account of things and the Playboy docuseries that A&E did, the Playboy Murders, where they get into all of that type of stuff. And she doesn't really lean into any of that. She doesn't really talk about any of that. Then we move on to chapter 6. Her life was really starting to change. She was still with Playboy, but now she had TV on the horizon. Her motto at the time was, when you change your thoughts, you change your life. And she kept moving her life forward. She kept propelling herself forward and trying to make sure she was moving her career forward as well. And it seemed like she had some pretty strong thoughts because she had a major upgrade. And remember, she also believed that her thoughts killed her babysitter. So clearly she had some powerful thoughts. So she got a small part on Home Improvement with Tim Allen. She also talks about the time that Tim Allen flashed her. I guess he was walking past her dressing room and he had a robe on and he like opened the robe and he's like, well, it's only fair. And he like flashed her and then he like covered back up and he's like, well, it's only fair considering I've seen you naked, LOL. Tim Allen has since come out and denied this interaction. He says that it never happened. It sounded a lot more scandalous when it broke in the press, but in the book, she like really brushes over it and the whole thing it didn't seem like it was that big of a deal, at least compared to the way the press was making it out to seem. In the book, they made it seem like he like it was some sort of assault in some way. And, she kind of like just brushes it over very quickly and like keeps the pace moving forward. So, she was like, it made me a little uncomfortable, but I just kind of like awkwardly laughed and like, didn't really think about it again since then. He says that it never happened. It sounds like it was such a like passing sort of situation that I'm pretty sure it did happen and maybe he just doesn't remember it. I don't know. But she said that the show led to a lot more people recognizing her more and more. So fame was becoming, part of her identity. Her life was changing very quickly. The next thing you know, Baywatch wanted her. She initially declined, but they really wanted her and they offered her a job and they kept trying to get her on the show until eventually she buckled. And so she left Home Improvement for Baywatch because she said that Baywatch just seemed like a more exciting gig. They were filming on the beach. She didn't have to be in the studio and with all the lights and all the crew. She was like, it was just fun to like be running on the beach all day and to be rehearsing my lines and to be performing them in the ocean. So she was like, Baywatch just seemed like it was the better decision for me at the time. Baywatch then ended up becoming like this mega international top show. Her Barbie ended up being like one of the most sold Barbies from Mattel at the time. She never actually profited off of that, but she was like, I didn't think to profit off of it. I was just in the moment. I was living life. I was enjoying myself, and it was great. Then next thing you know, she starts to star in films. Her first role was as a concubine, and she actually kind of seems proud of her performance in that, even though she was really new to acting. She says that she had no clue what she was doing, but she was learning along the way. And it seemed like she had just like this, I guess it was an it factor, but also just like this natural beauty that people seem to really be gravitated towards. And that's what kept getting her these gigs rather than her actual talent. And she ends up saying it later in the book that talent really doesn't matter. It's your work ethic. Because a lot of talented people won't get jobs because they don't actually put in the work. And a lot of people that aren't very talented end up getting the jobs because they end up putting in that strong work ethic. And she definitely had that work ethic. Yeah, Carrie, I think it's a combination of like her YOLO personality, like you only live once, let's do it, fuck it. And then this other, part of her that's like, I want to work, I'm ambitious, I want to make sure I can do and accomplish every single thing that I can. She talks about her boob job. She says that with surgery, you always gain something, but you always lose something as well. Her boob job became the talk of the town. And it seems, she felt like that's all anybody ever really wanted to talk about. And it was every time she did an interview, right? It was always about her boobs. She said that it was shallow, but, it wasn't fully thought out. She just did it in the moment because it felt right. And she kind of felt like that's what people wanted and expected from her. But now she's like, okay, if I have these boobs and people will keep booking me on these interviews to talk about my boobs, then I want to use my influence positively. So she ended up writing to PETA. And this is where her activism really started to take off, which is interesting because she says fame isn't something that you can pursue and it's something that you can't stop either. It just kind of happens. Um, which is interesting, but she's like, so if I have fame and it happened to me and I have this influence, then I want to make sure I use it positively. She said that fans would show up to the set of Baywatch like in floods just to get like a glimpse of her and to be next to her trailer and to be next to where she was filming her scenes. And so people really whose boobs? Pamela Anderson's boobs. Who else's boobs are we going to talk about? Just saw the title. Never mind. Yeah, we're talking about Pamela Anderson's boobs. So, but she said that it was becoming the more press and the more fans that she got, like the tougher it started to get because then they would send her on international press tours and like everywhere she would go, fans would like bombard her. And she remembers them like ripping her clothes and security having to like carry her out and them, chasing after her van and shaking her van. And so she said that it was like really intense. But again, she was much of a YOLO type of girl. Chapter 7, she says that when you put something out into the universe, it always finds its way back. And for her, she says it's like a boomerang. You put it out there and it always finds its way. So she talks about meeting Tommy Lee out at a bar. She says that it was like this pull of gravity. Her friend warned her not to pursue him, but she claims that Tommy Lee was just someone she couldn't resist. He called her hotel one night. She answered the phone and seductively told him, she's like, I want you, but only for 24 hours. And then I'm done. And then she blew him off. And she thought that that would kind of end him because she didn't think he would only want her for 24 hours. But she ended up having a work trip booked for Playboy out in Cancun. She goes, he finds out that she's there. He follows her there. She says that she avoided him for the most part until their final day of the trip. She was like, you know what? Screw it. It's the final day. What's the worst that can happen? So she decided to meet up with him. And after meeting up with him, she decided to extend her trip and get married to him just a few days later. She was initially dating Kelly Slater going into the trip. And now all of a sudden she was leaving with the skull ring on her finger and Tommy Lee as her husband officially. Showed that her mom was pissed. The media was going crazy. It was wild. I guess they took a lot of disposable camera pictures. And I don't know if anybody remembers this, but when you had your disposable camera and you would take it to like a Costco or whoever would develop the photos, then they would put all of the pictures in like a bag and then they would have all the bags just kind of sitting outside. So it was really kind of like a free for all. You can grab anybody's pictures or like packet of pictures. I remember that like when my mom used to take pictures and stuff and then we would go to Costco and then they would just have like this kiosk where all these pictures that were printed, they were just there and you can go and you look for them and then you get yours, which was also kind of weird to just think about. And like, no wonder people were stealing pictures all the time. But so she's like either the people that worked there made copies or someone made copies. I guess copies from it would the copies would have had to have been made, I guess, from the actual picture, like the developers, not anyone that would have stolen the pictures, because I guess she ended up getting the pictures there. I remember those cameras and picking your pics up. Exactly, Jenny. Isn't that wild that we used to do that? I just remember that being a thing. Like people would steal your pictures all the time, which is like so weird because it's like, why would you want somebody else's pictures? But I guess you would like hope that you get lucky and you could like catch some titties. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you steal somebody else's pictures? Because they're not pictures of you. What are you going to do with somebody else's pictures? What if it's like somebody else and their grandma? Why do you want pictures of their grandma? What if it's their grandma's titties? Like, why do you want your grandma's titties? Like, it's crazy. I remember her getting married after 4 days. It was nuts. Yeah. So the media had the pictures and the pictures were printed everywhere. And it was nuts and it was crazy. And she was like, we were not expecting it to actually do this. Waiting to see your role, only like 2 would be good. Exactly. Once you actually got all the photos, you'd be like, oh, most of these are total trash, right? Was Kelly Slater a skater boy? He was a skater boy. She said, see you later, but nah, 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 nah. What happened to their show, the one that had just come out on Hulu or Netflix? Okay, good point, Jenny. So there are 3 different versions of the story out there. So there's the book, then there's her documentary on Netflix, which is just one part. And then Hulu produced a scripted series that was told from, I guess, the perspective of the contractor that stole the sex tape. So the Hulu series was not Tommy's account or Pamela's account. And from what I've heard, I never saw it, but from what I've heard, they were actually kind of nice to Pamela in the writing of the Hulu series. It was scripted though, so they were actors playing them. And then Netflix had a documentary series that was told through Pamela's perspective. And then we have the book. And the book barely gets into the tape like at all. We'll get into it. But anyway, so she marries Tommy and they were madly in love with each other and they couldn't get away from each other. They just knew that they were meant to be together. Tommy would play the guitar naked and sing songs about her. And he loved to sing songs about every body part, even her toes. And she said that he just made her feel complete. So they went together everywhere. She was willing to do anything to make it work. And she said that once their life together took off, it felt like a movie. Then we get into chapter 8, and she booked the film Barbed Wire, which was her first leading role in a major film. Ultimately, we know that one bombed and didn't go anywhere. But this was, and I believe in the documentary, she says that this was her only real major film role. Tommy would wait for her naked in her trailer, and then when she would come in between scenes, he would mess up her hair and mess up her makeup. That way, she would have to like get it retouched and have to redo her hair, which would ensure that she had more time to spend with him. And he was very possessive. It sounds very toxic, and it sounds like very like lots of love bombing. Like it's not a relationship that I think we would parade knowing these things today, where we're a little more in touch with therapy and our feelings and like what a healthy relationship is. It sounds like it was a very toxic AF relationship. He got banned from the set for striking a producer, but he would like still hop the fence and he would still sneak onto set. And at first, Pam was like, I thought it was funny. And then it was like kind of crazy. And she ended up losing a lot of weight and she began withdrawing from the people around her, which also a major red flag when you're losing weight and withdrawing from everyone around you and you're like your whole life becomes consumed with one person. It's not a healthy situation. But I guess there was one day where she failed to show up to set, and then they ended up finding her unconscious. And it was because she took a handful of Advil and she drank vodka, hoping that she might just kind of fall asleep in the bathtub and sink away. And ultimately, it didn't settle with her stomach. So she ended up like puking it all out. And then they found her on the floor in a pool full of red Advil puke and they rushed her to the hospital. And, it was a whole thing. She ended up being fine, but Tommy had crashed his car into the makeup trailer and like punched a couple of makeup cabinets the day before. So she said she was just at the end of her rope. And that's when her brother Jerry got involved and he went off on Tommy and he blamed Tommy for nearly killing her. And then it was in that moment while she was in the hospital that they found out that she was pregnant. Ultimately, that ended in a miscarriage. But she was like, once we found out we were pregnant, it just brought us back together and we were in love all over again. And I forgot that he just crashed his car into my makeup trailer. Crazy. Literally crazy. So months later, she ended up getting pregnant again. And this time she was like, I'm going to take it easier. I'm not going to push myself as much. I'm going to make sure I take care of my body because I don't want to lose another baby. She and Tommy were very much in love with their first baby boy, Brandon. They, were creating this family together, and it just like deepened, I guess, their love for one another. But it was also challenging because they were starting, or at least her identity was becoming more of a mom, and he was losing his wife. And then the paparazzi was merciless, and they would nearly drive them off the road, and they were constantly harassing them. And then they were getting sued left and right because Tommy would get frustrated, and then he would go and strike them or punch them or break their cameras or whatever it was. They were constantly having to settle new lawsuits because Tommy was attacking them, and then that became a tactic because they would antagonize them so that they could sue them and then get money out of Tommy and settle with him. And the next thing you knew it, Pamela's pregnant again, and now she's pregnant and she gives birth to baby Dylan. And this ultimately led to Pamela leaving Baywatch to focus on the babies and to focus on her family. Then we get into chapter 9, and this is where we get into the tape. And we know the story from the Hulu series. We know the story from the documentary. It was hidden in a safe. Apparently, at some point over the past 6 months, the safe went missing. She claims that it had to be an inside job of somebody that took the safe. Based off of the Hulu series, it looks like it was a contractor that Tommy wasn't paying. So they were like, all right, well, we're going to steal the safe and hope that we get something out of the safe. And so they took the safe and then ended up coming across the tape. And then they were like, oh my God, this is crazy. Like, we can use this to blackmail them. Eventually, Penthouse called Pamela and Tommy, and they offered $5 million in exchange for the video that they had, which was the sex tape. Pamela said that they didn't take it seriously until it actually broke on the news, that they were like, no, give us our tape back. Like, you're not going to sell it. And we don't want $5 million. We just want the tape back. Like, that was stolen property. And then it ends up breaking in the news that there was a Pamela Anderson impersonator that was selling the DVDs on the street and selling them. And then all of a sudden a VHS showed up at their house, and it was not so grande. It was Tommy, I guess, watched the tape. He didn't want Pamela to watch the tape. He didn't seem that embarrassed by it, but she says that to this day she's never seen it. She didn't want to see it back then, and she hasn't watched it even now. So that she knew that she had to be strong because she was pregnant with Dylan at the time. So, they tried to fight the release, but the depositions were brutal. They had nude photos of her blown up in court. They would ask her about her body and her body parts and her preferences and positions in the bedroom and all of these different things that were just really uncomfortable and stressful for her. And I guess that was their tactic, to embarrass her, hoping that she would drop it or look really dumb. But I'm pretty sure they felt confident in their case against them. Not because they were in the right, but I think because they could either malign her character so much or just like push them into not wanting to continue to pursue the lawsuit, which is ultimately what happened. She says that it took a real toll on her, so they dropped the lawsuit altogether. It had a big impact on her family. She says that to this day, it still had an impact on her kids. It was stressful, but all of this ultimately led to a fight between her and Tommy. It was a really bad fight. She talks about the night that Tommy grabbed her and shoved her into a wall and broke her nail, and she was bleeding. And all this happened when she had baby Dylan in her hands. And Dylan at this point was only 7 weeks old. And she remembers Tommy grabbing Brandon and running out the door with Brandon. And he was screaming and he was crying. And she called 911 and the cops came. And then they ended up pressing charges. She did not, but they did because they saw the condition that Pamela was in. So Tommy was arrested and ended up having to serve time in jail. This ultimately led to Pamela divorcing him because she was just like, I'm never going to allow something like that to happen again. And after that night, I'm done, which good for her. The fact that she was not willing to go back, considering the relationship that her parents had with each other, where they would break up and come back and break up and come back. And it was just like a toxic environment for the kids. She was not willing to do that. So she divorced him. She says now, looking back, it's possible that he was like on steroids and that's why he had this intense rage in him. She thinks that that was the only time she was ever truly in love, which is also what she says in the documentary. Then we get into chapter 10. And chapter 10 is where she says that she dove into the male psychology because she was raising 2 little boys and she wanted them to become healthy, self-sufficient men. So she did a lot of work to make sure she raised them right. Chapter 11, she remembers taking the boys to the Playboy mansion. And she says that a lot of girls there looked up to her because here she was being a single mom. She'd been married, but she also has a really strong career and she has these 2 boys and she seemed to be a great mom and she always made sure to take care of them. Then she ended up meeting not Chris. She ended up meeting Kid Rock at a concert. His name is Bob. His real name is Bob. They started dating. They ended up getting married in San Tropez. And that's when Kid Rock, aka Bob, told Tommy, "Hey, I want to marry her." And then Tommy was like, "Don't even think about marrying her. I'll kill you." And then Kid Rock's like, "All right, well, I'm gonna marry her anyway." And she said that he was actually really good to the boys. But then there was a screening of Borat. And Bob, aka Kid Rock, saw a scene of Pamela in the film, and I guess there was a reference to the sex tape, and he was really unhappy about that. So he flipped out and he called her a whore and he stormed out, and she ended up breaking up with him. But then she ran into him again at an awards show, and Tommy Lee also happened to be at the same awards show. And then they broke out into a fist fight, and it was all caught on camera, and the world got to watch it. And she was like, "Oh my God, it's so embarrassing. And these boys are so crazy." But she made them crazy. I would love that type of influence, to make two guys that crazy over me where they just started going at it on national television. Then we get into chapter 12, and she built her own little home for herself and her boys in Malibu. And she remembers all the boys' friends running around, and she loved it. And she loved just kind of being a simple beach mom. And she just seems like a real simple kind of beach gal. Then we get into chapter 13. Chapter 13, she talks about being offered a magic show out in Vegas, and she would be the magician's assistant. And initially, her agents were like, "You don't want to do this." And she was like, "Heck yeah, I'm a rebel. I want to do everything, especially if you're telling me not to do it. I want to do it." And she didn't like Vegas, but she said that Vegas really loved her, and her face was all over the place on billboards and slot machines. And it was a wild environment, but a toxic environment. And she knew that she couldn't stay there for long, and she knew that she had to leave. And two guys on her team ended up losing a blackjack bet, to the poker player Rick Solomon, who's a really popular poker player. And obviously, when you're playing against a pro, like, you're probably not gonna win. And so they ended up losing the bet to him and having to owe him a couple $100,000. And I guess they didn't have that type of money. So Rick said he'd forgive the debt if Pamela married him and slept with him on the spot. And she was like, "Okay, I'll call your bluff. Deal." And she agreed to do it. And she said that they just had this instant spark, and she got married to them. She kept up with her promise. She married Rick Solomon, but then ultimately her assistant found a crack pipe in the Christmas tree, and they blamed Rick. And Rick's like, "It wasn't me. It wasn't me. Somebody play Shaggy. It wasn't me. Coming naked in the shower. It wasn't me. Saw me banging on the sofa. It wasn't me. She even caught me on camera. It wasn't me." So Rick says it wasn't him, and he denies it to this day. But Pamela says that she couldn't have an addict around her kids, so she immediately had the marriage annulled. She even mentions that it's possible that her assistant planted the crack pipe in the tree because there were rumors that he was addicted, and he, was an addict, and it's possible that that's how they got Rick away from her. Not mentioned in the book, but I believe at some point later down the line, she ends up remarrying Rick and then divorced him again later. Again, not mentioned in the book. We saw that in the documentary. So I guess little bits and pieces that we get in the documentary that we don't get in the book, and then little bits and pieces. Again, that's why I say documentary of the book. Chapter 14. She has a deep passion for animals. She does a lot of work with PETA. This led to her I guess, dating Sam Simon, who's the co-developer of The Simpsons. They had a strong connection. She was very friendly with him when he had cancer. He ultimately ended up passing of cancer. She doesn't make it clear whether or not they actually dated, so I don't know if anybody remembers when she dated him, or if she dated him or he was just a good friend. But she says that we all need to have a little more empathy, and we can all change the world. And she believes that it's great. And she helped the whales, and she helped the dolphins, and she helped fight for Julian Assange, and she still wants to fight for him, and she believes that he'll be free one day. She says even though people might not take her seriously for being sexy, she doesn't believe that your intelligence should be hindered by your own sex appeal, and she's very proud to have broken that mold and show that pretty girls can be smart too and can be impactful. Then we get into chapter 15, and this is where she talks about her boys and how her boys are the biggest loves of her life, and how she taught them how to feel and not run from uncomfortable feelings, but to receive them and to release them, and to not only feel, but to also live and to ask questions and explore and give life everything you've got, because we've only got one and it goes by fast. And so she seemed to have really raised them right with a good head on her shoulders, and gave them a good opportunity to have a good head on their shoulders. She says that she would take them to art galleries and museums, and she would bring them to volunteer with her a lot. She raised them to be very independent, despite how painful it was for her. She talks about that, how she struggled to give them an opportunity to like make their own mistakes and fail on their own and fall on their own face. She's like, it was hard to do, but I knew that they had to do it. And she raised 2 strong, independent boys. I can't imagine being pregnant with all this stuff on. I know, isn't that crazy? Sorry, the damn 90210 theme song after you mentioned Brandon. Brandon punched Tommy Lee and knocked him out. Yes, I remember that. There was clearly some contention between Brandon and Tommy Lee. None of that is addressed in the book, nor is it ever addressed in the documentary. Okay, then we get into chapter 16. We're almost done, guys. There are only 19 chapters. So she talks about Saint-Tropez and how Saint-Tropez was such a special place for her. After her kids went off to college, she went to France to go and live there. She took all of her work over to Europe for that time, continued her activism efforts. She very, very, very briefly mentions Adil Rami, who is a pro soccer player, who was her boyfriend at the time when she was in France. And all she really says about him, she writes that he was her lover during her year in France, and it ended in betrayal. It's literally all she says about the relationship. He was my lover during my year in France. It ended in betrayal. She also says that she struggled writing this book, juggling between blurting out the truth and also protecting people. She says, I think some parts are best left unsaid, leaving it powerless. And she also, in reference to Adil, she says, another lesson, but par for the course. The truth is unpleasant. Spare the children. A lot of it is written in like poem form. So it's not like an actual book. It's written like line by line. What are those called? I don't remember. It's been a long time since I took that English class. Then we have chapter 17, which is mostly a poem about selling her house or her colony home, which she calls her masterpiece. Then we get into chapter 18, where she moves home to Vancouver Island. It was very earthy. She has a ranch there on the water. I think this is the ranch that we see in the documentary. There seems to be a lot of poems in these final chapters, and she's using them to tell the story. It's sweet. It's not that compelling, to be honest with you. A lot of it is poem form. The further in the book it gets, it's more just like her own poem, collections of poems that kind of loosely tell stories, but they don't really tell anything. Iambic pentameter. I don't remember. I don't think that's the term that I was thinking of, though. But yeah, it's all like the way it's broken up and the way it's written. Yeah. Then we get into chapter 19, which is the final chapter. And she says that when it comes to love, she takes responsibility. She loves love, but she's still learning. She thinks that this project of writing her book was a labor of love. She says then Chicago fell into her lap and her boys encouraged her to do it, to play Roxy Hart, because that was the role that was offered to her. She says this time she was ready. She had nothing to lose, and she immediately said yes. She was absolutely going to do it. She said that she was scared, but she was eager to dive in. She says that she doesn't have much talent, but one thing she has is work ethic, and it's your work ethic that will always set you apart. Instead of talent, it's work ethic. That's kind of how I feel. Like, I feel like I don't have a ton of talent, but I definitely have a strong work ethic, and I'm learning and I'm growing and I'm continuing to push myself to learn and grow. And so I really appreciated her kind of writing about that. She says that she was originally approached to play Roxy about 10 years ago, but she ultimately didn't do it because her boys were still really young and she couldn't leave them to go off to New York, and she didn't want to leave them to go off into New York. So now she's in a better place. So she says that playing Roxy and doing Chicago and moving to New York for this time was the best medicine. And the show was ultimately a big success and people loved her, which is the same way the documentary ended. And then we have the epilogue, and the epilogue really is just about, she says she has, at this point in her life, she has full self-acceptance. She has no need to explain herself to anyone anymore. And this book is really just a piece of her truth, but it's not her full truth. They're just pieces of it, right? The pieces that she felt were compelling or important, or not compelling, but I guess important enough to share. Because I think there were pieces of her life that were maybe a little more compelling. Overall, I would say the book is okay. I would not recommend buying and reading the book. I would recommend just watching the documentary, because it's literally the exact same thing. It opens up with her childhood. It opens up with her brother. It opens up with her parents' tumultuous relationships. It talks about all of the assaults that she faced. Then in the end, it ends with her getting Chicago and kind of looking forward to what the next chapter of her life was going to be. So the book and the documentary, I thought we were going to get more in the book than we did in the documentary, but it's literally the exact same thing. If anything, maybe even less. Maybe we have a detail or two, but I feel like the detail or two that was not discussed in the documentary that's touched on the book isn't really worth buying the book, to be honest with you. She was so good on Broadway. That's what I heard. I heard she killed it as Roxy Hart on Broadway. But yeah, there's not much more that you get in the book that you don't get in the documentary. And if anything, you probably get more in the documentary because it's not her telling the story. It's the filmmakers that tell the story. And she herself wasn't, she said she didn't want any creative say in it. She didn't want to watch it. Whereas in this one, she talks about how she wrote the book all herself. She didn't have any editors. She didn't have any ghostwriters. And even when it came to the editing of the book, she did all of the editing herself. She would take the notes, but she made sure she was the one that got to go in the document and actually make the changes to the book. That way she approved absolutely every single thing. The book was good. I would say do one or the other. And if you're looking for a quicker, easier option, then I would definitely say watch the documentary. Literally the same thing. I think the only thing that we didn't get in the documentary, because there are 3 different assaults. There was the assault from the babysitter that happened when she was really young. There was a second assault that happened with an older man when she was about 12 years old. And then there was a third assault that involves her boyfriend, Billy, when he and his friends ended up forcing themselves on her. So yeah. That's one of the only pieces. And then the John Peters thing, I don't think we get much into in the documentary, where she gets a little more into that and she seems to like really like him. But like she was married 6 times. We don't really get into any of those marriages aside from Tommy, but Tommy's like really glossed over in the book. We don't get a lot of Tommy. We don't get anything about the tape. I mean, we do, but it's like this much. And it's just like a condensed version. Watched the documentary and it was enough for me. Thanks, Zach, for dissecting the book for us. I mean, I feel like this was a really boring book club, though, because I didn't really dissect any of the book because I feel like we had already talked about all of this last week when we watched the documentary. So it was a bit of a bummer and it was definitely a little disappointing. I really like Pamela Anderson and her big heart. Thanks for covering this, Zach. I do too. I thought she was great. Also, I did want to touch on the Bret Michaels thing because I remember I initially said that Bret won his lawsuit because there was a second tape from IEG that they were trying to release. And Bret ended up suing them, and Pamela didn't want to participate in the lawsuit because she had just dropped her lawsuit with Tommy Lee. And Bret was really upset about that. And then he accused Pamela of being the one to leak the second tape, which was when Pamela and Bret were dating back in '93. They recorded a tape together. IEG described this tape as a lot more explicit. I don't know what that means necessarily, where it seems like with the Pamela and Tommy sex tape, that was not even, that was really just a lot of home videos where they were kind of naked and hanging around and lounging around more than it was like an actual sex tape. Whereas the Bret Michaels one was a lot more explicit, I guess. But ultimately, Bret was able to get that blocked from being released. And it does seem that he was not paid, even though the lawsuit was for $90 million, and even though he won that lawsuit, it doesn't appear that he got that full $90 million. It seems like he may have only ended up walking with like 50,000. I was trying to look into it. Again, a lot of the news, this was back in '98. So a lot of that news was like print news and not as much blog online types of news. So I've heard about the Bret tape. Yeah. There's a clip of it that made it online, but the full tape never ended up getting out. She once said that people might not like her, but she's only had a 9th grade education. She worked really hard and now she was a millionaire. Yeah, I mean, listen, I believe it. She's definitely a hustler and she's definitely, living life and keeping it going, and good for her. You go, Pamela. You go, girl. I like Pamela. I have a much deeper respect for her now. And that's all I got for you guys. And that's the book. Love Pamela. It's available now. It's up in my Amazon storefront. So if you guys want to purchase any of the book club reads, they're all up in the Amazon storefront, which is amazon.com/shop/Zack Peter. Amazon.com/shop/Zack Peter. So you can check that out. You can buy all of the Bravo books on there. Shout out to my pals at Chomps. I wish I had a Chomp stick with me here, but guys, check out Chomps. You know I love Chomps. They're my favorite protein sticks. They're yummy. They're delicious. They pack 9 to 10 grams of protein, 90 calories, no sugar. They're gluten-free, paleo, keto. They're a good snack. I like to eat extra protein so that I can make sure that my cravings are satisfied, so I'm not ravenous by the end of the day. So I recommend you guys check out Chomps. If you want to use code ZACK20, you will get 20% off your order. So you can go to chomps.com, check out their protein sticks. My favorite, I like the turkey because they have more protein, I mean, 1 more gram of protein. They have 10 grams of protein. I had a turkey stick today. It's in the trash. I can take out the wrapper to prove it. But my favorite is their jalapeno beef. I just like spicy, and I hear they may be coming out with a new spicy one soon. So I'll keep you guys posted. But give Chomps a try at chomps.com. Use code ZACK20, ZACK20, ZACK20 for 20% off. Chomps.com. Okay, so we wrapped Pamela Anderson's book. What book or what documentary or what series should we recap next? I don't have anything planned because originally I was thinking of continuing Pamela's book for next week, but after reading it, there was nothing interesting. I mean, there was nothing new, that there was no real reason. And it also seemed like there wasn't a ton of interest in continuing to dive into the Pamela stuff outside of the documentary. The doc was good. I really enjoyed it. I do like Pam. She's a boss bee. I agree. I like Pam too. I had a much deeper respect for Pam after all of this. But let me know what books you want to read for next week. We have a lot of options. So let me know what celebrity book you would like to dive into next week. I mean, we could also dive back into the royals, maybe do the Diana files if you guys are interested in that. Maybe doing a throwback now that we did all the Meghan and Harry stuff. Maybe we go back to Princess Diana. I know that was of interest for a lot of people. I know we've talked about doing like a Tori Spelling book, her original book, Spelling It Like It Is. That might be kind of fun to do. Paris Hilton has her book coming out soon too. So maybe Paris Hilton's book will be, I think it comes out in March. So if that's the case, then we'll be sure to cover the Paris Hilton book when that comes out because it's an actual like autobiography, I believe. Not like a scripted or not a scripted, it's not a fiction book, which she's written in the past. Selena Selena has her documentary series. Are you guys interested in the Selena Gomez docuseries? Tori's books were great. Tori, I would love to cover Tori. Okay, so people seem interested in Tori. We can do a throwback of Tori and then dive over to Paris when the Paris book comes out. Can somebody Google when the Paris book comes out? Just Google Paris Hilton book release. That way we know the date because I'm streaming on everything on Instagram and YouTube and I don't want to fuck with the feeds. But if anybody can Google when the Paris Hilton book comes out, type it in the live chat. That way we know when we can expect to cover that one. But okay, so look, so Tori or Diana, those are our options. Tori Spelling or Princess Diana. Take a vote here now, and then maybe Diana Chronicles was great since we spent so much time with Meghan and Harry. Yeah, I'm kind of interested in the Diana Chronicles. Okay, people are saying that they want Selena. Okay. Yes, Diana. Okay. I'll put a poll up on Instagram and we'll make a decision. I also put a poll up on YouTube too. That way we can make a decision for what the next unpack will be. And then I'll make sure I tally it all up for next week and let you guys know which one we're going to end up doing. Paris not Paris, Diana or Tori. I feel like at some point we'll do Tori. Diana, even though it's going to be sad, Diana for sure. I like the BH vibes of Tori and Paris. Well, if we do Diana and then we do Tori and then we do Paris, that may actually be kind of good. Okay. All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining tonight's recap for Zack Pack Weekly Unpack. Love you guys. I appreciate you. I will let you go and yeah, get ready. We have a new podcast episode dropping on Wednesday. I'm going to be talking about the update on the Brandy and Caroline stuff because that's wild. We'll be talking about the Robin Juan Dixon affair and Andy grilling Robin on Watch What Happens Live, talking about Tom Girardi appearing in court this week. And then I have an interview with Amrit from Family Karma. So be sure to tune into that. Amrit, Family Karma on the podcast tomorrow with a Brandy Caroline breakdown, Tom Girardi breakdown, and Robin Dixon breakdown. So stay tuned. Big episode coming on Wednesday. Love you guys. I appreciate you. Have a wonderful night. And I will talk to you soon. I'll see you live again on Thursday. And then let's watch Jersey tonight. Maybe I'll go live after watching Jersey and we'll have a little kiki moment. Okay. Good night, guys. Bye.